Let's go now to this conversation again. A government dismissing suggestions that the Employment Equity Amendment Act is, of course, targeting specific individuals and could lead to job losses. Let's now speak to the Employment and Labour Minister, Thulas Nxesi, who joins us live now. Minister, thank you so much for your time. Before we get into our conversation tonight, I'm sure you are listening to some of the viewers talking about how they're stretching their food budgets. How are you doing it?
I didn't hear the previous one.
So we were talking about how people are stretching their food budgets now, given the rising cost of living. And I wonder, how are you doing it?
No, everybody, it's under pressure in terms of looking at our budget. But the reality is that the low earners, the poor in particular, must be struggling more, given the high prices which we are facing, and that's the reality which we're dealing with, and it therefore says we need to look at how we resolve the issues which have led to this, which are very complex issues. You know that it has to do with the slow growth of the economy. We know that it has also to do with the energy crisis which we are facing, which has also been exacerbated by a number of factors. But we agree that we are under very hard economic times, and we have to do everything to ensure that we relook at our budgets.
Thank you very much.
That's the reality which is facing us.
Definitely, Minister, and thank you for indulging us there on our question tonight. But let's talk about this Employment Equity Amendment Act. There are concerns from the Democratic Alliance, I'm sure you've seen them, that this could lead to job losses. The party is saying about 600,000 people could lose their jobs. You're saying that this is not true. Tell us why.
You see, the problem we're seated with is the EEA, when it was promulgated in 1998, this was an attempt to implement the constitution to bring about equity and equal opportunities in the workplace. And this was left to the goodwill of the employers to implement what is known as voluntary, or to implement it on a voluntary basis. And I can tell you that socially responsible employers complied with this, and they did comply. But unfortunately, this must be said, the annual reports of the Employment Commission or Employment Equity Commission, they continue to indicate that the change was at best extremely low, especially in the higher levels of management, particularly to the cost of the Africans, the colors, the women, and with disabilities. So it was for this reason that amendments were drawn to encourage the employers to comply. We couldn't just leave this after 24 years. We are seated with this picture in our country. And remember that the objective here is to promote equity and equal opportunity at the workplace. And the minister, therefore, is empowered, in consultation, I must emphasize that, with the Commission and all relevant stakeholders, specific sectoral targets and guidelines have been drawn. Have been drawn up, and the provisional targets. So it has not been just a unilateral approach.
So are you saying that these concerns are not justified, particularly when you look at how, they talk about how this could lead to a social and economic catastrophe? Are you saying some of the concerns that they have are not justified?
They are not. The amendment or the amended act also promulgates Section 53 of the Employment Equity Act, which existed all along for issuing of the EEA compliance certificates, and as a prerequisite for access to state contracts and doing business with any organ of the state. So there's nothing new in this. The state, therefore, has the right to expect that some business, and they have to comply with the law. And the controversial issue which has been raised is the exclusion of the small businesses employing less than And this concern is coming from the black business in particular. has been that, for instance, just because a business employs fewer than 50, it might still what we would call a massive turnover of billions of rands, and why should they benefit from it? But we are very clear that no employer is exempt from the all must comply. All that we're saying is subject to the labor inspection orders. The only change is that the amendment seeking is to reduce what we call the administrative burden on small businesses, most of which will not have large administrative HR departments. We're trying to reduce this reporting requirements. That's what is happening. But the concerns which have been raised, we're still going to engage on the targets. We want to hear the arguments against the target. What we cannot do is to leave the top management of these companies untransformed. Otherwise, that is a disaster for the country.
As a final question then, Minister, let's talk about how you hold businesses to account, because, others could argue and say to you that we were not able to find the suitable candidate of, the right kind of target when it comes to some of their qualifications and all of that. And they could put forward various reasons that for them make sense. And I'm saying for them specifically. So how are you going to ensure that there's compliance here?
We do have our inspectors who are going to be moving into the companies, checking specifically the issue of the employment equity. We've done it with the top JSE listed companies, and we've found that a number of them are not complying. And one of the amendments which we are pushing is that if people are not complying with the basic legislation and also the issue of the employment equity, we are going to be very hard to them. It's not just soft penalties where people will charge them or we give them a penalty of 10,000 rands or 100 million rands because it might be switched to them. 100,000. It might be switched to them. They normally budget for that. What we're going to do out of the amendment is to say a particular percentage of their profit will have to be affected. We will have to penalize them, and they pay a particular percentage of the profit. That will force them to comply. We just have to be hard on that. We can't compromise anymore.
And let's see then what happens when this process concludes, Minister, and hope we do speak again at the end. That is the Minister of Employment and Labour, Thulas Nxesi. Thank you so much for your time as we talk about this all-important issue of Employment Equity Amendment Act.